Jesus said some pretty strong words when he was alive. And a lot of times we take those words and we apply them to ourselves, and they're actually pretty weighty. They weigh us down a lot. And I believe simply they weigh us down because we want to be good and we want to do good. That's a desire in our hearts and in our lives. And I think that if you're a Christian, you would agree with me. You would say, I want to do good. I want to be pleasing to the Father, but my life just doesn't seem to ever produce that. And we go around in circles in our head and we say, well, maybe I'm not saved, or, maybe I'm really not a Christian and I got to just try harder and just do better in my walk with God. I need to read more. And we make all these rules up, and ultimately at the end of the day, we always fail at them. And then that cycle continues. We feel condemned and we just feel like we're a crappy Christian and maybe we're not saved. And, Jesus says, go and sin no more, right? So what are we supposed to do about that? So I want to talk today simply about that passage in John 8 that Jesus says, go and sin no more. And, what we typically do as Christians is we'll throw it around like it's some command from Jesus to, never sin again. Go and sin no more or else. Have you ever heard that? I've heard it all the time. We talk to people and we say, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I'm going through that. Or they just see it in your life and they say, hey, Jesus commanded you, go and sin no more. Yes, sir, I'll go and sin no more. But we ultimately just, again, turn around and fail at it, right? And so what was Jesus really meaning? Jesus wasn't necessarily giving a command, but he was declaring something. He was giving some promise, a way of living that we as Christians just glance over. And today I want to tackle that and show you, because when you see this truth, it's going to transform your faith and the way that you see yourself and the way that you see God, and how you can actually start living in this freedom that Christ, says that we have. And so how do we live in that? Because the desire of the Christian is to live in that freedom, right? We want to be free. We want to be free from sin, and we want to see fruit being produced in our lives. But how does that happen? A lot of the times there's this tension in the Christian walk that says, well, if you want to be free from sin, you just got to try harder. And the crazy part is that is the opposite of what Jesus taught. That's the opposite of what Paul taught. That's the opposite of the Bible teaches. It's not do more to change. It's simply this promise of rest in me and you'll see transformation. It's this promise of you already are new. So now live from that position. We love to create scenarios to where we are in control. It's the same thing that happened in the garden. God said to them, do not eat of this fruit or you'll know right and wrong. It was this experiential knowing, this experiential relationship with good and evil, meaning that once they took the fruit and ate it, they became like their own God. They became the authors of life. They had the ability now to interact with good and evil and decide for themselves how they were going to be justified. And it's this sense of self-righteousness that we all still have today. We want to be in control of the outcome. So as Christians, what we do is we say, man, we want to stop sinning. Well, we're in control of that, right? So you better try harder. You better do more. And it's actually what arouses sin in us. Paul says in Romans 7 that, I'll just read it to you really quick. He says, am I suggesting that the law of God is sinful? He said, of course I'm not. In fact, it was the law that showed me my sin. I would have never known that coveting was wrong if the law said, you must not covet. But sin used this command to arouse all kind of covetous desires within me. If there was no law, sin would have no power. See, Paul is letting us know that the second that we create a rule behind transformation, sin now has the power to come into our lives, control us, condemn us, make us feel guilty. But that is how we're taught as Christians that we need to live. We need to live from this place of trying and make sure you never fall again or else. But that is not what Jesus taught. And that is not what the Bible tells us is the way of transformation. So what is the solution? In John 8, when Jesus is talking to the adulterous woman, everyone's there about to stone her, throw all the stones at her. And Jesus says, if any of you are without sin, you can go ahead and stone her. But no, they all have sin, so they all drop their stones. And he says, where are your accusers to the woman? And she said, I don't have any. And he says, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. See, Jesus was not just declaring some type of command to her. He was declaring a way of life. He was declaring how to live this life out after you encounter the Father. See, Jesus' words to her were not go and sin no more else, but his words to her were this amazing declaration that says, I don't condemn you. Now, it's from this position of freedom that now you're empowered to go live out your life. See, you're no longer here having sin control you. Your life doesn't revolve around sin anymore. Your life now revolves around your righteousness and me. There's no other simpler way that Jesus could have described this, but we glance over it because of our self-righteousness. We want to jump to this go and sin no more or else mentality because we think we have a part to play in our transformation. But Jesus is so clear. He's saying, listen, I do not condemn you. I love you. I am for you. And now you live in me and I'm in you. And it's from this position of this overwhelming grace that now when you go walk out your life, sin just no longer has a part to play. Doesn't mean you're not going to fall, but it means now this position that you're in of not condemned means that you can go live your life without sin, without the punishment of it. The whole idea here is to get sin out of your thoughts. We're so funny as Christians. We just don't. Sometimes we miss the Bible in a lot of areas. See, Jesus' heart for you, God's heart for you, is not to focus on sin every day. But that's what we make it. We make this life some type of fight, some type of, struggle that we like to call, what could I say, faithfulness or obedience, or we say, thank God for burdens in my life. God doesn't want you to be burdened. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. But we think that when we have all these, when we grit our teeth and we pull ourselves up from our bootstraps and we press on, that we're fighting the good fight of faith in this sense of it's up to me to prove that I'm good, that I'm right. And listen, when we start doing that, Paul lays it out so clearly. If you want to live your life under a law and a rule, you better be careful because you're giving sin the opportunity to be your master. He says in Romans 6, he says, sin no longer is your master. Well, why? How is that the case? He says, for you're not under law anymore. You're not under the requirements, the rules. He says, instead, you live under the freedom of God's grace. That is why, and that is how sin loses its power over you. It's no longer this life of walking rule by rule, step by step, making sure you never fall. It's not about thinking about not falling. It's about changing your mind to stop thinking about sin and how good or bad you are and start thinking about how good you are in Him. How good you are in Him, how righteous you are, and how holy you are, and how He has sanctified you already. See, in the Old Testament, it says that if the sacrifice of bulls and goats worked, then there would have been no guilt or no conscience of sin anymore. See, under the New Testament, under Jesus' sacrifice and the atoning blood, and now that we're new creations, see, His heart for you is not to be focused on sin and how well you're doing in this life. His focus is for sin to no longer even be in the picture. And how does that work? When we know who we are in him and that we're not condemned. Jesus is declaring in John 8, you're a new creation. He's saying, I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more, because sin should no longer even have a part to play in your life, in your mind, and how you justify yourself before me, and how you think that you're right in my sight. No, sin should no longer even be in the picture, because now you're new. You're in him, and you're holy, and you're righteous, and you're blameless. And that is what Jesus is trying to get us to understand in this whole book, is that now we're in him. And he is in us. And sin no longer has dominion over you, because you're not under these rules anymore, but you're living under this grace that I have freely given you. And all I want you to do, child, he says, is rest in my love. He says, rest in my arms. Stop thinking about how good you are or how bad you are, and just rest in the fact that I am your righteousness, that I am your holiness, and that you can come to me with whatever you need in any state that you are in, because their standing before me is pure and righteous and blameless. It doesn't mean you're not going to sin, but it does mean that you can come to me anytime, because you already are new and you already are holy. There's nothing that can separate you from his love. It's a promise after no condemnation. So just rest in that today. Okay, rest in the fact that Jesus is declaring to you this new way of life, that there's no condemnation for you. And if you're in him and there's no condemnation, now look at this new life of freedom that you can live. A freedom where sin isn't even in the picture anymore. So live from that position and see freedom actually reign in your life and rule. I love you guys. See you soon.